We're going to start out with a panel discussion that's going to really bring together people from across the province and across the experience of PCN. So we have how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 excellent physicians and members from different divisions who've come forward to talk about where they are with PCN, what their PCN experience has been. And we crowdsourced questions that generally people had on their registration. So we have many questions that we can ask. We're going to try to do it in that way because the panelists have had a chance to reflect on those conversations and those questions beforehand. And of course, at the end, we can open it up for more general questions if there's time for us to do that. And so let me introduce our panelists today. We're going to start with Dr. Karen Kowski from the Sea to Sky division. She's the co-chair of that division, and she is in wave 3 of PCN. Oh goodness, with 4 screens to look at. I'm hoping that everybody can see who's there. Is there a way, Leanne, that everyone can just see the panelists, or is that just a speaker view would be the best way to do that?
That would have been an excellent idea. We don't, but I think speaker view is probably the best way. And then when the panelists are called upon, they'll appear with a yellow highlight.
Okay. Karen, are you there? Do you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you very much, Tracy. My name is Karen Kowski. I'm the co-chair of the Sea to Sky Division of Family Practice. And as Tracy mentioned, we're in wave 3, so just waiting for our EOI approval, which will hopefully be at the end of October. Our EOI has been split between 2 communities because they are really distinct, which has made the application a little more complex. And then we will start on our service plan for one of the communities.
Thanks, Karen. We're going to hear lots more about that. Dr. Rob Lehman is also joining us for this conversation. He's from the Powell River Division, and he's working really specifically with child and youth mental health, and he's presenting later this afternoon. So, Rob, are you here to join our conversation and introduce your experience so far?
I am here. Thank you very much, Tracy. It's great to be here. I know the Sunshine Coast, Powell River tries to take that moniker for itself as well, but I'm actually on the real Sunshine Coast, which is the Gibson Seashell Southern Sunshine Coast part, and I'm co-chair of our PCN steering committee here, and we have just had our expression of interest approved for PCN, so we're just now beginning our service planning. And these may be foreign concepts to people, but that's the stage that we're at. So it's trying to draw together all of the community input to really look at what our needs are on the Sunshine Coast. And it's a process that we'll all be going through in that PCN development. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us so much. Our next panelist is Dr. Josh Gregan, who's from the Chilliwack division. So we're going to move away from the coast. We've had 2 coastals, and now we'll go a little interior. Josh is an RCC BC Core member and a network lead. He's also leads the network of rural division conversations with his team. So Josh, you want to say hi?
Thanks, Tracy, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I'm Josh Gregan, as Tracy said. I come to you from the traditional unceded and ancestral territory of the Coast Salish people. The place that I've been working, as Tracy said, the last 17 years is in the Chilliwack, Hope, Agassiz, Harrison Hot Springs, and Fraser Health rural region, which is Fraser Health, and has the privilege of being, suburban, urban, rural, remote, with our 22 separate Indigenous communities. And so I acknowledge the privilege that I had to work on there. Today, I'm actually calling from Victoria, which is also the Coast Salish territory, which is always fascinating, just how connected we truly are. And so I have been the chairperson, the PCN lead, and a variety of other roles in the Chilliwack division, and happy to share whatever nuggets we've learned from our Wave 2 journey that started back in 2018 and continues on even this afternoon if anyone wants to come and join me at the PCN steering committee meeting later. So thanks, Tracy.
Thanks so much, Josh. And also Dr. Bonnie Bagden from the Comox Valley Network of Rural Division, and she's from the Comox Division Network of Rural Divisions, and she's in Wave 2. I did see Bonnie, so hi Bonnie. Welcome to the panel. You want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Bonnie Bagden. I'm a family physician in the Comox Valley. Very honored to be here today and honored to be calling in from the traditional unceded territories of the Comox First Nations people. We at the Comox Valley were actually wave 1. So we had everything finalized in 2019 and have been working on implementing since that time. And I, as I say, very happy to be here. Wishing it was in person.
Yeah. And our last panelist is Dr. Greg Salinger from the Kootenay Boundary Division, where he's the co-chair, also a Wave 1 community. And so, Greg, you want to introduce yourself a little bit, your experience?
Hi, yeah, I'm Greg Salinger. I'll just make a bit of correction. I'm actually from the South Okanagan-Similkameen, which is also a Wave 1 community. It's also seated on the unceded territory of the Silks people, and consists of a few communities. There's Penticton and Summerland, which are the major centers. Oliver Soyes, Caramias, Princeton, which are rural ones, and 4 Indian bands: Upper Similkameen, Lower Similkameen, Penticton Indian Band, and the Soyes Indian Band. So it's largely rural. I'm the former PCN steering committee co-chair, Division of Family Practice lead, and board chair of the division of the South Okanagan-Similkameen, and I completed my 6-year term in the last few weeks, so I'm no longer seated in those positions. So I'm really speaking from my experience. I was involved since the inception of PCN back in 2018 when we started our expression of interest as a Wave 1A community, and have been involved with it intimately ever since. So it's been quite the experience. So thanks.
So as everyone can see, we have just a really great wealth of experience here today to talk about this PCN process and their experience of it. And so we're gonna dive in. And so I'll just start maybe with Karen, since you're in wave 3, everyone's a little bit ahead of you. I'm curious about your overall satisfaction level with PCN so far, where you saw your challenges. And so in wave 3, given that there should have been some more experience, what's your satisfaction level with what's happened for PCN so far?
I think definitely being in wave 3 makes this an easier experience. I can't even imagine being in wave 1 and sort of moving along through it as all the rules are developed and processes are developed. But interestingly, even in wave 3, there is a real lack of clarity around decision making and around partnerships and really what the actual rules are. So we've had some stumbling blocks. Also a real lack of clarity as to who has what information when. And definitely if we were to have input, we would say that you need some feedback loops to make sure that people have received all the information that everyone's put in, because that really creates some communication challenges as well. But overall, for a smaller community, I think our process has probably been much simpler than those whose shoulders we stand on.
Does anyone from one of the earlier wave communities have a comment about the challenges you faced and how you overcame them? Greg, go ahead.
Yeah. There's lots of challenges from the beginning. I think the beginning, it was a new partnership. We had experienced a bit of the divisions in 2018 when this started. I think our division was only about 8 years old. So we were just kind of dabbling with partnership with Interior Health, at the CSC level, and getting to be where a bit functional. We had a few successful projects that we had run, but really wasn't a very intimate partnership. What the PCN did is really brought us closer together and brought our First Nation partners in with us as well. And that was something brand new. And it was quite rewarding at the time to be able to work through this partnership and really come up with something that would work well for all 3 parties. When we developed our expression of interest, there was lots of dialogue back and forth. I think we met weekly on Fridays as a partnership, just to kind of work through this for a good 3 months before we finally came up with something. Then it was the wait to try to get what money was. And initially we were all a bit disappointed with the funds that we got from the start. I think it was darn near half of what we had asked for, because we were really pie in the skying it. And that's kind of what we were instructed to do, is just, think of the best case scenario and go for it. But reality hits, and we got what we got. And I think we did a good job with it. I think in the end, probably the most satisfying part of it was that it brought these relationships closer together. It brought the partners, Interior Health and the Indian bands, First Nations, closer together as a partnership. It also started bringing communities closer together. So, when we started working in the rural communities and the urban communities, we actually got community leaders, so mayors and elected officials involved. But as far as taking a look at primary care as a whole and how they can contribute, so that was something brand new that we've never had before. And then on the grassroots, on the ground level, it's actually bringing these staff in and bringing all these allied providers in, and then start getting them into clinics and seeing their, how they enjoyed being a part of this, how the providers started enjoyed having them there, bringing nurse practitioners in, working shoulder to shoulder with providers. That was great. They even, they got hospital privileges, so they're working alongside family physicians in hospital now, doing primary care, inpatient care. So that's great. So as far as, and that's all been, it's been really rewarding and satisfying to see that. And I agree, the challenges are now we have to get into maintenance mode. We've gone through initial excitement, we've gone through the honeymoon period, now it's maintenance. How do these partnerships work together? And yeah, we are in a situation where I think Interior Health and the ministry have had a long-standing relationship and a long-standing communication method that isn't always reflective of having a second and third party or partner involved. And so it's how do we redesign the system so that the partnership can be recognized during those communication processes, so that when the ministry talks, they talk to the steering committee as a partnership and not to just one partner and have it diffuse out to the other two. So that's what we're going through right now. It's a bit of a challenge, but I think the fact that we got PCN to where it is right now, I think that challenge can be met and we'll deal with that. So.
Bonnie, do you have can you give us a bit of an outline of like what your PCN actually looks like right now, given that you were a Wave 1 community coming through, and where you see the satisfaction for your team members, for your broader community coming from what PCN looks like in your community right now?
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. So as you say, we were a Wave 1, and we, our change lead, I think she was the one who coined the term, we're building an aircraft in the air. So at the very beginning, there was really minimal direction. And that, as Greg said, what it did was bring us all together. So I think the satisfaction for me, the biggest satisfaction is working together in that collaboration between the Ministry, Health Authority, Indigenous Health and divisions, and community is the biggest thing. That is the most satisfying thing that we can see. We can see that there is primary care reform that we can do, and hopefully with really good support from the ministry and our other partners. But I think that would be the biggest thing for satisfaction. And I would say satisfaction depends on the day, depending on what our meetings results have when we do meet with some of our partners or the ministry. But overall, I think the teamwork has been amazing. But I think it was really tough trying to start from the beginning and from scratch. So the things that we went through, we are very happy to share. And I think a meeting like this is wonderful to not reinvent wheels. Thank you. Oh, and sorry, where we are, we're implementing. Apologies. So we have one team-based care clinic that was sort of came into our primary care network, and we implemented by adding a nurse practitioner, nurse, social worker into that vulnerable populations clinic, and that is up and running and going very well. And we are just our other implementation is hiring allied care providers into early adopter clinics. So we have 9 early adopter clinics in the Comox Valley. And we have 9 allied care providers, so 2 social workers, 2 MHSU clinicians, 1 pharmacist, and hopefully 3 RNs, which we are just in hire mode for now. COVID put a big wrench into, of course, our hiring and implementation when we all had to go into virtual care versus in-clinic care. But I feel that we are now getting to that, and hopefully we can get to the maintenance mode that Greg talks about, but we're not there yet. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. Josh, I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit on when you're talking about your broad community, you have rural, remote, urban, suburban kind of within your division, which is a really interesting mix for sure. What steps do you feel like you had to take as a division or in a PCN planning to kind of shore up existing medical clinics and make sure that people felt like they were able to continue to succeed as individual running practices within the context of the larger PCN? How did you make sure that their ability to deliver primary care and stay consistent and connected to their community? Do you want to walk us through that process? It sounds like it might be an easy conversation.
Yeah, no problem at all. A couple of words, we'll finish this right up, Tracy. I think I'll just echo what Bonnie and Greg said early on, is it's really about partnerships, connections, and relationships, right? And so we know as family doctors, that's true in our day-to-day offices. Like if I have a relationship with my patient, that works. But that's unequivocally true when you start looking at clinic level work, you know, how clinics interact, how they're going to create spaces, how they're going to create opportunities for change management. And that's absolutely continues to be true, you know, as Greg mentioned, in the interior health with our health authority partners, that the relationships matter. And COVID absolutely is an amplifier for all things that we knew to be true before, and unequivocally are now even more so. And so we are very fortunate in Chilliwack Division to have really good partners, both with our Fraser Health partners, but also then with some of our Indigenous communities. Now, with 3 different nations and 22 communities, that is very challenging at times. And you navigate some really difficult or challenging historical conversations. But when you come at it earnestly and you come at it with humility, there's opportunity for you to then connect and understand where people are at and how they want to get somewhere different than where they are. And so early on, this goes back now to fall of 2018, which is 1,000 years ago in COVID years, we had the privilege to really go and meet with people. And that, I mean, you know, in longhouses, at the school gymnasiums, in one of our community centers, and not only listen to the providers, you know, hey, you're providing, you know, rural health in Hope and Boston Bar and Agassiz. Tell me a little bit more about that, where your gaps are, but also then with community leaders and Indigenous partners and say, hey, you know, what's going on? What can we do? And we had a series of 5 magical in-person events, you know, back in 2018, which really continue to shape and form. We've used our annual survey from the divisions to say, hey, where are the issues? What can we do to solve, or not solve? What can we do to help these situations get better? And for years and years and years, whether it be our Indigenous communities, whether that be our providers, whether that be our clinic level, a lot of it comes down to the shortfalls or shortcomings with mental health and substance use. And so in our PCN service plan, we've now had submitted since June of 2019, and the funding since April 2020. We continue to focus on that, and boy, have we been thankful that was the case throughout the last while. So to simply answer your question, Tracy, it really is about connection. It really is about, you know, being either face-to-face or connected, you know, see people, hear people, listen to people. And my friend Gracie Kelly, who's our Indigenous partner manager at the division, says, when you listen, you need to listen with your 3 ears, the 2 on the side of your head and the 1 in your heart. And so when you listen to people and providers, you know, from your heart, you have the opportunity to say, yep, this is really important, and let's innovatively find ways to solve or work on this together. And generally people then want to do that with you.
Yeah, that's great. Rob, do you want to comment? I'm curious about your experience of where in those partnerships and that building of relationship you found your greatest challenges. So we know that there's lots of successes, but what was the hardest cultural coming together, you know, between the different partners around your CSC table or within your community?
Firstly, it's just great to hear the other wave input here. And I think this just shows the value of being here, because I'm already learning a lot of stuff at our stage as to what's already happened before us. And I think if we keep up this ability to interact like this, it's going to be, as Karen was saying, really helpful for us as we develop a PCN to hear the experiences of other communities. Firstly, I want to take a step back because I was busy correcting the geography of where I'm coming to you from. And I neglected to say that I am coming to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Shishel and Squamish nations, and I'm really grateful to be here. We also have our executive director, Michael Aberhart, and one of our PCN steering committee members, Raina Sivakova, here as well. So whenever I screw up something about the Sunshine Coast, I will ask them to just jump in and correct me if they can. I wanted to say that this is such an opportunity, is how I've seen this whole PCN, with the willingness of, normally we don't congratulate government, but I just feel like it's been an opportunity through the government visioning of how they want to add the voice of people that work in the front lines to get it right for how healthcare can be delivered in a more effective, efficient way in our province. And that opportunity to have the voice has been what's drawn me to this. I did my family medicine training in London, Ontario, like I hate to say it, like 43 years ago, but it was in a team-based environment. And I came back to BC, where I'm from, and I've missed that my whole career. And what PCN offers is that opportunity to work in a team again, which I've missed for a long, long time, as apart from just all doing the best job we can in our individual practices. But there's so many other people out there that can help us. And that opportunity to work with allied health professionals was really what caught me about this whole process. So it's having the voice and having that opportunity to build a healthcare team in each of our communities that I think is so beneficial. And I think we're seeing the results of that in the wave one speakers that have been speaking. I know there's lots of hurdles to pass through. We're just developing our service plan. And so we have an early draw of a social worker. So it's been kind of a mix of developing a service plan, but also implementing part of our PCN from having our social worker here. We borrowed heavily from Richmond, who did a living lab for the introduction of their allied health professionals. And we've had a graded introduction of our social worker to our 5 family practice clinics on the coast. So it's really been a great opportunity to keep involving our frontline family physicians in this process, because it's vital that they really engage and see the benefit that can come from having those teams working with us. So it's been an interesting time of developing the service plan and implementing part of our PCN with the social worker. Lots of hurdles to go through, but it's just happening, and we've got a really good group of committed people. We've had lots of changes that's been hard to adapt to, but again, if we keep the goal in mind I know the government wants that attachment. They want people to have a primary care provider, and I totally get that. But we also, what draws me is this opportunity for team-based care, which is where I came from in my training, and I know can be so beneficial for our people. I don't even know if I answered your question, Tracy.
That's okay, Rob. That's okay. This is the conversation that comes of the formal questions is way more often interesting than necessarily is always just a starting point. So thank you for sharing that. What I was wondering, and I can move maybe to Karen, since she's just in the early stages as well, or beginning PCN process. What has been your greater, like in terms of building those relationships and bringing partnerships together? Which ones felt like easy, you had that partnership, that collaboration existed, and which ones have been harder for you to establish and feel like you're in a trusting and actual collaborative experience around your tables?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We, prior to PCN, had a massive community engagement in 2019, where we invited everybody we could think of in our community that intersects healthcare, which is basically everybody, and it was pre-COVID, so had an in-person event at our large conference center, which created a lot of community interest in primary care, and really started a conversation about how lack of access to primary care, either access to attachment or lack of good access, was affecting the entire community. So we had a lot of community interest prior to PCN starting, and that was quite lucky. And we found that adding community to the relationship was a game changer. We've always had a really challenging relationship with Health Authority, and we've had a lot of churn in the leadership for our area. Our Sea to Sky area is managed by leadership that's in Vancouver, and so it's a really small part of their portfolio, and it really is not in a disparaging way, but done off the side of their desk, because they have priorities that are just much bigger always. And that has continued to change over the years. So adding community to the relationship and to our decision making. So instead of a dyad of health authority and divisions, we now have a triad of health authority divisions and community. That has been a game changer. It's allowed us to make decisions. It's allowed us to keep moving forward. And it's really elevated the conversations and kept community central. It really refocuses the conversation to the fact that PCN resources are a community asset. They don't belong to physicians or health authorities or any one group. They're a community asset. And that for us has been the biggest aha moment and game changer.
Yeah, that's an excellent example of that. Greg, I wondered, given your multiple communities you mentioned as you started, how did you pull different communities in that sense? Like if you're talking about working in different smaller communities coming together, I'm sure you had some places and some physicians that were ready to go and really excited about the process, and others you had to pull along. In rural and remote, that's certainly our experience, that some of our communities are really ready to go and have this conversation and others are not as ready. I'm just curious if you had that same experience in your geography.
Yeah, it was something that we started from the beginning because we didn't want PCN to be exclusionary and have the haves and have not. But we also recognized that it was a big area and it was difficult to engage all the providers at the same time, to get them all on the same place at the same time, just because of where they're at and other commitments that they have. So we decided to try to keep it simple. So we started off as a, not necessarily a hub and spoke model, but we started off with the center that we seemed to have most ready, and that would have been Penticton Summerland, is where the PCN started. So that's where we made our expression of interest on. But included in that expression of interest was a growth plan. And so we decided to do the whole area, the whole South Okanagan Smoke community, is just one PCN, not multiple ones. And so the start of it would be Penticton Summerland. And as that got established, then we would submit a growth plan for the rural areas. And that gave us time to get the rural areas all engaged. And that involved getting a hold of the providers as well as community officials and First Nations in those areas, bring them together and start talking about what PCN would look like in their areas. And so we're in the process now of working through the growth plan. We've had all the engagement, we've submitted. It's just a matter of having everything approved, announced, and going from there. So that was that's the method that we used, and I think it's going to work well. And I think in the end, it's a large area as far as change management goes and administration. I think that's something that we're going to have to evolve as we go. We don't know exactly how that looks like, but yeah, I think we have a lot of interested people out in these rural areas now, so I think it'll work.
Does anyone else want to comment on that idea? Yes, I'd love that. Thanks.
So we went the opposite, and that sounds a bit funny, but I think the fact that rural and remote communities are far more nimble, we generally, because of our nature, are a bit more innovative, just like, this is what I have, and so I better figure this out in some manner. And so we actually started a fair bit of our work and a fair bit of our implementation, specifically in the Hope in the Fraser Canyon. And part of that was, maybe a little bit of bias from the past chairperson, me, but part of it was also just understanding that, like, here's where the needs were, here was the opportunity. And because of the centralization, a couple of big clinics into communities with hubs into 5 different Indigenous communities in the Agassiz region, and subsequently, 3 separate clinics, one at a ski hill in the Hope region. We had the ability to have a relatively small amount of resource, so 1 mental health worker or 1 GP new to practice or a half-time NP that could make a fairly significant difference early on. And so as you started to shape and form the plan and you understood where the gaps were, they were very apparent in our rural areas, more so than our urban areas, which have a lot more complexity. And so now into year 2, we've rolled out proportionally more resource into the rural communities and are having some successes, as opposed to still getting some change management features down in the urban. So I'm a huge proponent for the fact that rural should not only lead urban areas, but the entire province and maybe the world. Is the opportunity for us to sort of learn and grow together. And because we're so adaptable and because we're so innovative by the nature of who we are, we can get things done.
Yeah, I think rural should rule the world as well. Great, thanks. You definitely have a choir of people that'll sing your backup on that one. Bonnie, how did you decide, or how did it work out for you? You said you had a select number of clinics that were your prototype clinics. I can't remember the exact term that you used. Was that just based on that leadership within that clinic being ready to go, or was it based on their geography across your region?
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. We had a division-wide not meet and greet, but an information session about the primary care network. I believe that was in December of 2019, and we had some criteria to become, to be one of the first clinics for our primary care network. And it was at that meeting and showcase that 9 of the clinics were very interested, and we accepted them. So it was just community interest or clinic interest. And that was mainly from MOAs, clinic managers, and the lead physicians who were there. So it was interest and engagement.
Rob, did you want to jump in?
And thank you. I just wanted to follow up on Karen's comment about community engagement and really realizing in this conversation that there's no one recipe that will apply in this order for every community. It's from that element of community engagement. We really haven't got heavily invested in community engagement until we were further on into our planning process. We're just now developing patient advisory table and also an Indigenous advisory table. Our Shishel Nation requested to have their own advisory table, which they felt would make them freer to really be expressing their points of view and their opinion. And so we are just trying to develop both of those. We've also just sent an invitation to our MLA, our MP, our community leaders, the leader of our Shishel Nation, in that community building effort at this point. So something that we didn't do early on, but something we're really realizing how critical that is in developing a PCN for our community, which is for our community, and just really hearing what Karen and Josh have both said about that. And my point is, there's no one way of doing this. It's what is going to work for your community, and how that evolves in your community is just fine. And it is great to brainstorm off each other and just take all those bits for your own community, for taking that back and recognizing this is the process that we're going to follow.
I'm wondering if anybody dares or is happy to comment on their darkest time in the PCN process, like when it sort of felt like, well, there's a good place we're trying to get right now. I don't know how we're going to get there. And if that existed, what was the challenge that created that? This is totally not on your list of questions. I apologize, but I'm just curious, as we have other communities listening as they're trying to get through this process. Bonnie, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. So I wanted to just sort of finish up on what I was saying before. Why some clinics chose to be PCN early adopter clinics, which is what we call them, because every community clinic is in the PCN. So our PCN is community wide for sure. And we at this forum, several of the clinics had chosen not to, just because it did feel, I think there was some hesitance because we were making this plane in the air, and some of the clinics were at capacity for, we don't, can't really have anything new. I think that there is some hesitance about having the ministry being involved or the health authority be involved in primary care clinics. So I think that some clinics put down their hand or did not raise their hand because of that. So sort of a wait and see approach. But we still do say that each of the clinics and every physician in primary care is a part of the primary care network, just don't have access to the allied care resources yet. And I'm sorry, one of the things I forgot to mention when I did say we had allied care providers is we have a wonderful Indigenous representation as well. We have an Indigenous wellness advocate and an Indigenous wellness liaison. And they are wonderful in our group, and they are the most positive. Our Indigenous partners are the most positive and optimistic, and they are a positive part of every day in the PCN for sure. So I will leave it at that. I apologize. I forgot to mention that earlier.
That's okay. That's That's there's so much in this conversation. It's such a rich topic to try to get out, and especially when we're talking to your wave one communities, wave two, you've been in this process for so long. There's been so much happening, and you've built on your successes and overcome your challenges. So of course these things will come to you, and I'm happy for all of you to jump in this conversation. I know if we were sitting together in person in a panel, the flow of this would be a bit different, and we would feed off each other. Greg, did you want to jump in? You showed up big on my screen.
Greg or Josh? Tracy, I think you mean Josh. So I guess I'm.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Not to confuse Greg and I. So, you know, our darkest hour. That was the question, Tracy. So our darkest hour was probably a reflection of the darkest hour that many of you had. And so, just for timing, you know, we did our engagement in 2018. We submitted in the summer of 2019, and then we waited and we waited and we waited. And we actually didn't get approval or any funding until April of 2020. And so all of you remember April of 2020, it was just after March of 2020 when the world was, you know, proverbially on fire. And so here was this anticipatory expectation we were going to get funding from this 145-page plan that we put together, and they just simply lost capacity to do anything about it. And so we felt that we had sort of lost some trust with our providers. So we got excited about change management and allied health, and then this sort of landed in our lap. And it was like, how on earth are we going to run the hospital, build a COVID ward, you know, set up testing centers? Oh, and by the way, there's an $11 million PCN plan you now have to implement. And there's some pressure, you know, from the ministry to sort of make those things happen because, you know, they are at the same spot where they want that to, you know, be successful and create attachment. And so there was a real reckoning in April, May, and even into June of 2020, where it's how on earth are we going to do all these things? And so how we got through that was unequivocally based on our team. And we simply had to divide labor to say, great, we've now hired, thankfully, and this is my advice to all the communities, hire your PCN managers early and hire them well. You know, it's like picking a marriage partner, right? You know, pick them, find them, you know, invest in them, make sure that they can get some stuff done. And so then we sort of tasked a very intrepid group of PCN managers to start to sort through and pull apart the resources, while the rest of us were also trying to then again run COVID wards and that sort of stuff. And so what was true before PCN, which was you rely on your team, you rely on your team, you rely on your team, was unequivocally true. And we had the team members on who could then carry the PCN while the rest of us were doing other things. So that was our darkest hour with a little glimmer of light shining through, Tracy.
And Rob, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just from that perspective of as family physicians, like we're in this for the long haul, right? We've just committed, and we're in our communities, and we're doing our work. My darkest times have been from the people that we work with. This is a group effort with our health authority and our First Nation and our division of family practice. Firstly, we lost our health authority, a local director. Secondly, we lost our division executive director. Thirdly, we lost our new project manager. We've got replacements for all those people, and they're great. But then we've just lost our second project manager, who was on the job for 2 weeks. So these kinds of experiences where you feel like you've got some momentum, and being long haulers, if you want to use that term, as family physicians, it's really been eye-opening to see how staffing changes can really affect the flow and the momentum that you've built, and it can be really upsetting to feel like you're losing that momentum. And COVID has been a real wrench as far as momentum in the first place. So this added on to that has really been a trial. And what I have personally had to do is keep focusing on the goal. The goal for me is what's going to be best for our community. How is that going to work best for our primary care providers in our community? So if I keep going back to that every time we've been kind of slapped with the staffing change, and I'm not criticizing the present staff we have. Michael, I know you're here and you're great. It's just the fact of the change is difficult. So for me, it's just that bit of wisdom. If you keep remembering your goal and just keep working toward it, regardless of what else is nipping at your ankles on the way, it feels better when you can keep coming back to that.
One of the things that I found so interesting during this process is COVID was a momentum killer. And then in some ways within our division, it actually helped us form relationships that we never would have had otherwise. So we managed to kind of come together in certain ways that was not necessarily the urgency of the situation led to some of that. Karen, do you want to comment on how the crisis and the chaos, well, it obviously gave us all certain challenges. What were benefits for your community that came from that? Although I have to mention, Karen was in the middle of like a crazy outbreak in Whistler and the Sea to Sky as this was all happening. So maybe, I don't know how you kept your head above water is what I would say about that, but you kept going somehow. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. And I've got to say that it was almost a manic energy that we got from the true collaboration during our biggest, we weren't allowed to call them outbreaks, surges of COVID, where our group of community physicians took on the COVID testing and assessment and tried to make it robust enough so that those people never ended up in a merge, that when you showed up for your COVID test, you also had your 1-year-old assessed with the fever, you also had your strep throat treated, you also had whatever else it was that was compatible with COVID symptoms, which if you think back a year ago was just about everything, including fatigue. So we saw all those people in this like incredibly well ventilated trailer. And there aren't that many of us, so human resources were definitely a problem. And when one day in November of 2020, we went from seeing 20 people a day to 120 people a day with an appointment-based system, that was probably our lowest moment. But interestingly, our health authority, with whom we have a challenging relationship, and somebody mentioned that membership rolls over every 2 to 3 years, ours has been about every 6 months with almost all interim leadership. So that's really hard for them as well. Like I am empathetic to that. And they have the same leadership takes care of all the acute care in Vancouver. So again, totally unmanageable jobs. But they phoned us up and immediately supported what we had going. So within 2 hours of talking to someone, there were health authority employees in our office answering phones and working on foreign EMRs, and happy and really excited to be part of something meaningful for the community with, as I said, like this manic energy. And then we connected with Whistler Community Services, which ramped up food bank deliveries 300%. And then Whistler Blackcomb Foundation funded all these personal necessities kits, 2 weeks worth of soap, shampoo, disinfectant that they delivered to people. And we were able to get self-isolation housing. So at the end of the day, it was a ridiculously happy, energy-filled time that I recently did a TED Talk on because it was such a positive experience. And also to dissipate the notion that all the youth population in Whistler behaved badly, and that is why we had transmission. We had transmission because they live in dense shared accommodation and they have frontline jobs with no paid sick days. So the entire community coming together to address that was the highlight of COVID after that one day in November where our testing unit went from 20 people a day to 120, which for 5 physicians and 3 MOAs is a struggle.
And how do you think you're going to take that manic energy and that positive relationship that you managed to build? Like, how does that lean forward now into your PCN planning as you're going forward with your EOI?
Well, the theme of the morning seems to be relationships, because it is all the relationships that developed that have been energizing and just make everybody happy to keep working and showing up to work. So we now have a really intimate relationship with Whistler Community Services. And the 2 social workers that we're bringing on will sit at Whistler Community Services and try to support their outreach workers to increase mild to moderate mental health capacity in our community, which they call emotional support. And the great part of that is that Whistler Community Services fundraises, they aren't really constrained by budgets. if they need 10 more outreach workers, they will figure out how to make that work. So it really allows us to be more nimble and respond to community needs. And we've got this primary care task force now that looks at trying to fill the gaps of what PCN does not address. PCN is fantastic, but it does not meet all the needs of primary care in our community if we want it to be really robust and not just survive, but be a center of excellence. So we've got this primary care task force that has our local government and community nonprofits and social services and fundraising groups and RCMP and our division. And that has become a really inspiring group that that I think has been the highlight of the last couple of years.
Thank you, Karen. Greg, I'm curious about you going through and wave one with your communities. How have you, people are really interested in from a logistical point of view, how do you put these allied healthcare practitioners into practices and find space for them and find an equity amongst community to use them? So do you have any insights or experiences you can share around how you actually physically housed the allied health professionals in clinics, what that looked like, and how that worked for you guys as a division?
We what we did is we started kind of a flagship clinic, and what it was is we were trying to do a model of what it could really look like, you know, a model for us to experiment with, but also a model for other practices to take a look at to see if they wanted to emulate it. And so what we did is we started something called a team-based clinic, and our team-based clinic ended up being called the Ponderosa Clinic. And in that clinic, we rented some space at an old clinic that was abandoned, and we refurbished it a bit. We did get some funding for capital investment from the Ministry of Health to do that, with the idea of setting up this team-based clinic. So in it now houses 2 nurse practitioners, 5 family docs. We have a neurologist sharing space. We have a psychiatrist sharing space, and we also have a dietitian, 2 RNs, and who else do we have? A physiotherapist and a social worker. So they're all in the one place, and they're all working together, and they're setting up this model to see how it works. By seeing the success of that and using that as a model, it stimulated interest amongst the rest of the clinics. And so the rest of the clinic is starting to request having more allied providers in. And so we were able to have some social workers out there extra that we have going into Summerland. We have extra social workers sharing spaces in other community offices. So that's kind of how we approached it. So it was really expressions of interest from these different offices that sent to the PCN steering committee to see if they could get somebody. The space issue has always been an issue because providers are conscious of the overhead of their space. So they're always wondering about how are they going to cover the cost of having an allied provider in there. And that was, that was a little bit more difficult to deal with. So there is some overhead that comes with these allied providers. It's not what a family physician would pay to share the space, but it's definitely, it's better than nothing. And so and that was enough to satisfy the practitioners that took on these, the clinics that took on these allied professionals. Because when they took them on, they started to realize that, when you bring a family physician into the practice, share space with you, and they pay the overhead, that's about the extent of it. They do nothing to support your own practice other than maybe help you cover call. It doesn't make your workload any lighter. It doesn't make your workload any less. It doesn't deal with those urgent issues that happen during the day that someone else can deal with. And so when they started to have experience having the social workers in these clinics, they found that it satisfied those needs. So having somebody in-house that can deal with the patients going through a crisis, or having a patient that's has some complex needs that they need met in the community, they can have a social worker see them on the spot. That allows them to see more patients. And so that's what really got providers to buy into this. And so it's a bit of a slow diffusion of it. Right now, we're starting to run out of allied providers to move into these clinics. And so we do have call it a pot of funds. We have a pot of family physician contracts that are sitting out there that we can't fill. Hard to say exactly why, whether it's the contract or whether there's some other issue, but so far we have difficulty filling. We're looking at doing, what we've been doing is seeing if we can exchange the cost of those with substituting allied providers instead of having the family physician contracts. It's been a bit difficult because those family physician contracts come with attachment, and you have to make sure you satisfy attachment first. We've been able to, we've always treated the PCN as a network within a network. So our main network is the South Okanagan-Smil Community Network of Family Practice and Primary Care. The PCN is just a funding model that has come within that network to help support it, augment it a bit. So we've never had it separate. And so by approaching it that way, I think all the providers in the community see the PCN as their own. And that's how we've tried to that's how we've inserted it into our own network. So it's just a matter of seeing what we can do to get more allied into these clinics.
Mm-hmm. Bonnie, if you want to jump in.
Thank you, Greg. That's fascinating, and I think we know that co-location of allied care providers and team-based care is one of the gold standards for team-based care, and I think that your team clinic is an example of that. I'm just curious. You said there are 5 physicians and a couple of nurse practitioners. Were they net new with the PCN, or were they in your community at that time?
They're in the community. The nurse practitioners were net new, and all the allied were net new. The family docs had moved from smaller clinics. So there was a 1-2 practice clinic, there's a 3 practice clinic, and then we had another one come in from outside. They were all kind of the early adopters to move into this clinic, and they went through a lot of change management and team building initially. Like it was weekly meetings on how to work together, how to work with these staff, try to build that vision and mission within the clinic so that they start working together. But since then, we've had 2 of those providers, and a third one soon will be retiring out of that practice. And we've been able to fill those practices within months. So there's no problem recruiting into this practice. No problem retaining into it either. The providers that have been that, the 2 that we had brought from the one clinic, we're going to just, when their lease was up on that clinic, they were just going to retire. Having moved into this team-based clinic, they said, we'll stay on for a few more years because we want to give it a try. One did retire, and they were able to fill their spot within a few months. So yeah, it's been good for both recruitment and retention. So
thank you. Our own experience has been that we would love to have a co-location model like that, but as we have, I think, 18 different clinics in our community, and it's hard to move into one co-location, which would be, I think, ideal, but as I think everybody realizes, not really feasible. So what we have done for trial of co-location is have the allied care providers go out to each of the clinics, but then that destabilizes them as their own team. So their allied care providers don't feel a part of a team, except for a team to the clinics that they're going to. We're trying to emulate that, but then the allied care providers are feeling that they're not their own team. So we are working towards some type of model that's sort of a combined hub and spoke. Continue trying to make the team as the patient medical home team with the allied care providers there, but also have the allied care providers feel that they are belonging in their own team as well for support. And if anybody has any ideas about that, that would be appreciated, because a lot of the clinics of our 9 don't have enough space because of overhead issues and just physical space to have as many allied care providers as there may be. Thank you, Greg. That was a great synopsis, and I think ideally one big clinic is a great thing.
Josh or Rob, do you guys have any comments on that, the team-based care and geography of that?
Yes, I really totally agree that the co-location in the same clinic is where that face-to-face is going to be able to happen, and that's how the team really develops. At the beginning of our service planning, as you probably already know from those that have gone through it, we are scheduled for these regular meetings with our health authority and the ministry about how we're developing our service plan. And at our first meeting we had just last week, we just added on the fact that we do not have physical space in many of our 5 clinics. And there is the overhead concern from those clinics, and it's just interesting to hear your comments, but those are the issues. So what we were proposing as what we wanted to include in our service planning was a CHC, which I think, Greg, you're describing as a flagship clinic. And then the comment from the regional Vancouver Coastal rep was, well, these allied health professionals are VCH hires, so it's their responsibility to figure out where they're going to work. So it's kind of thrown us into this kind of, okay, what are we going to do? And does that apply to nurse practitioners and family physicians that we hope are going to be coming to the Sunshine Coast as well? So I'm really curious about how you see that response, because our idea of having a physical space to house these allied health professionals particularly, and new NPFPs as well, is now kind of in this limbo while we're awaiting a response back from Vancouver Coastal about who is responsible for housing them in the first place.
I know we added health professionals in our little clinic on Gabriola. So rural and remote's often a little bit different. We have usually only got 1 or maybe 2 clinics in each of our small communities across the province. But yeah, without co-location, we wouldn't have been able to really have team-based care in the way that we think of it. But we did have to cover the overhead as physicians. We covered the overhead for that, for our social worker, and then our mental health nurse, and then our community home and community care nurse when we asked her to move into our space as well. We just covered that overhead for a number of years to make it happen. But I think that that's a lot to ask of everyone. And in these large PCN models where there now exists a model for funding, there should be a way to allow it to happen. And that's great to hear that, Greg, you guys are able to have that work. Josh, did you have any comments on that piece within your network?
Yeah, I was just going to continue to follow that tension through, right? So co-location to a singular entity is great for a larger area, but as you move out into the smaller areas, and so I continue to tout this, that the Chilliwack Division has 7% of Fraser Health's population and 40% of its geography, which is similar to many places where it's distributed. And so absolutely, if you're going to co-locate services, you need to be thinking about what services and why, and specifically what of those services can be done virtually, right? And then when you start to look at a space that may co-locate, now things like social work and mental health, I think, are primed for virtual care, as is at least 30 to 50% of primary care, as we're all in the midst of. And so using and again, I hope there's not too many health authority people on the line, using the strength of the 800-pound gorilla, which is the health authority partners, to look at getting resources like capital, right? We're talking millions of dollars for capital expenditures to get people co-located. And so that needs to fall on the health authority. That really can't fall on the division. We don't have that kind of richness. And looking at the same time, and then if you're going to build a place of co-location, making sure it's accessible to your entire geography, whatever that looks like, making sure you're engaging the Indigenous partners. So this is a space that is welcoming for everyone, not just the doctors and the nurses. And then looking at how you're going to sprinkle in, resources out there to the clinics, so you balance the point between embedded resources for a catchment, allied healthcare services, and then co-location to try and build teams. And it's a constant push and pull with no explicit, like, this is the right answer. The right answer comes from the grassroots, which is really you guys. And so if you'll allow me for 1 second, Tracy, to share my screen, just because this is a journey we've been on. And so this is the Chilliwack Primary Care Network Health Center that's been in development with the Health Authority for the last almost a year now, which has group therapy rooms, sacred spaces, exam rooms, and then drop-down stations for virtual care. And so happy to share that later on, and I'll stop sharing that. But that's been the real tension of trying to find who's going to pay for this, who's going to run it, who needs to be there, and why. And this is where the rubber hits the road when it comes to PCN implementation, is I know what my patients need, Rob knows what his patients need. Trying to figure out that from an actual implementation plan with a sense of equity is absolutely where you get to be some really crunchy conversations.
That looks beautiful. All of us just are taking a moment of like, la, that would be really nice. So yeah, you're gonna have to walk all of us like by the hand through that process. Josh, that's amazing that you've accomplished that within your region. That's fantastic. Karen, I know that you guys have been working towards a community health clinic. How's that? Where are you in that process at your point in community?
Yeah, I mean, we started that pre-COVID, pre-PCN after our massive community engagement, realizing that that was probably the way to go to increase attachment and access to full service family practice. And we spent about a year moving around the province, looking at different models of community health clinics, including yours, Tracy. What we're achieving to or trying to achieve is not a community health clinic in the strictest definition of what Ministry of Health currently calls a community health clinic, but really a campus of care. And I put my hand up earlier because we picked, out of all the places that we visited, we picked about 6 pillars of what was really important to us that we thought would create success in Whistler. And one of them is team-based care and co-location. And then also financial sustainability or viability. And our primary care task force has all community members and some just really super smart ones. And one of the things they initially started looking at was, can we fundraise for operational losses? Because as everybody has mentioned, all of these really aspirational models are currently not financially viable. And so that's what they've started to do, because they decided that co-location and that team-based care was really critical. And so we're looking at a community health clinic that is a phased approach. And the first phase is just the operational model of professional management, and it may not be co-located because we can't do that without the building, but the building is not the community health clinic. It's the operational model that is the community health clinic. So we have this phased approach, and each phase is financially sustainable on its own, even if the society were to dissolve and go away overnight. And that's been a really critical part of that phased approach. So the first part, though, does depend on fundraising for operational losses.
Thank you. So we are at just about before 10 o'clock, and this panel conversation is meant to go on for another 15 or 20 minutes. I just want to put it out. There's been so much rich conversation happening in the chat, but I'm not a skilled enough facilitator to pay attention to that and type in it and respond to it, and also keep my guests engaged. So thank you for those of you who are doing that in the chat. That's really amazing. And I'm sure we're capturing that as part of what we're getting out of this process. But I do want to gently, I know there's 83 or 82 people on this call, so it's not necessarily easy to do, but I do want to see if there's anybody that has any very specific questions or general questions before we go. I'm just appreciating, Greg Linton, that you have added a tremendous amount of breadth to this conversation through the chat box. If you want to just give us maybe your pearl out of that conversation, I'd welcome you. And if you can just introduce yourself to the group. You're not officially a panel member, but you're definitely contributing to the conversation. So.
Thanks, Tracy. I feel like an honorary panel member in the chat box. So in the Pacific Northwest, we've had some interesting issues, being, I think, the largest geographical zone for PCNs, and getting the Ministry of Health to actually acknowledge that was an interesting challenge for us too, because initially they had us scoped out as 1 PCN, and now we're 4 at least. And that's just because of geography, really. And there are differences when you separate out all of the communities, because, again, there's a lot of challenges with us too. We have, in our PCN region, there are 7 different Indigenous nations and over 20 Indigenous communities, some of which are isolated by islands or coastal communities, or just so far up north that they're a long ways away from everything. So these have been some of our major challenges. And then I would say the biggest challenge, though, we've had is trying to come up with a governance structure that will reflect relationships, not on a personal note, but more of how we're all going to react or act with each other when when we bow out, because even though we're long haulers as physicians, we're not even going to be there forever either. So as long as we can develop relationships within community, between health authorities, and there are several health authorities involved in our PCNs in the Pacific Northwest, then I think eventually we're going to arrive at some success. Because if you start throwing money into the mix here and you don't have some way of determining how decisions are going to be made in that governance structure, I think you're really hooped. So that's where we decided to start with the governance structure as our major pillar. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. It's really, this is just such rich conversation happening. I think with the time left, I'd really like to be a bit aspirational, although everything that's been discussed here feels inspirational and aspirational to some of us who are, just beginning our EOI process or really at the beginning of this. Rural and Remote Division of Family Practice has EOIs that need to be expressed in every health authority except for Fraser across the entire province. So we're just so grateful to learn from all your experiences and similar models of distributed care. It's really fantastic. But I would like to ask each of you guys to comment. Maybe Rob, I'll start with you. What do you hope for in 10 years, as Greg just mentioned, that kind of where are we going? So in 10 years, what would you like, what would it look like for you? And how would that feel like a success? What would it feel like success for you?
Well, following up from what Greg said, I will not be a part of this in 10 years, that's for sure, because this is the stage of my career that I kind of dedicated to this. We've spent all these years working in our individual practices, seeing individual patients. And when I retired from my practice, I thought, well, what can I do now to try to give back from some of that experience? So this has been an incredible opportunity to do that. But it really is about establishing those relationships, those mechanisms for the ministry, the health authority, and the Division of Family Practice to have a structure of respectful collegial dialogue where we can have conversations that are going to, and there'll be problems constantly that come up. That's just the way life is. It's how you establish a structure for dealing with those problems that is solution focused, that I think if we can get that right through the opportunity we have right now, I think it'll set us up for a healthcare system that I think has always been great, but can be even better as far as making our jobs easier, more enjoyable, making the outcomes for our patients that much better. So I think it is about establishing the governance and the relationships and the structures that will last going forward.
Thank you, Rob. Bonnie, where do you hope your community is in 10 years? What would you like to see as all this effort you've put in? Where would you like to see it paying off?
Oh, I always joke that I like Bonnie's world. It's sort of like Elmo's world, if people remember Elmo's world. Bonnie's world has primary care reform as the family physician and primary care providers being a part of the team, but not the team. So the team that every person, every community member, every patient feels taken care of and feels embraced and feels that their cares are being met. So addressing the 8 attributes of the primary care and improved care. And I don't like to say improved care, but better care for everybody, wellness for the community, wellness for primary care providers, wellness for patients, which we all are.
Bonnie's world sounds good. I like that.
I'm going to put in a plug. So I went to the NUCA, I went to South Central Foundation NUCA model of care in Alaska. And I'm always just so inspired just to, I think that they have the gold standard from what I see. So Bonnie's world is similar to what they have, I guess, for healthcare.
Josh, what do you see in 10 years for your efforts?
I'm going to reflect a little bit, Tracy, and then project, right? And so when we started the PCN journey, our line was PCN is a new name, but not new work. And so the foundation of the Chilliwack Division of Family Practice is unequivocally, we are doing this together, we are doing this collaboratively. And we've been through GP for me, and we are in the midst of PCN, and undoubtedly there's going to be a new evolution, right? The core of what we are is together, right? And so the core of what we do is for one another. And I mean that for the community, for our partners, and for each other. And so I envision the future where whatever injection of resource, whether it be GP for me or PCN or X, Y, and Z, that we have the ability to govern, to share, to partner together and build and reflect. You and I are on the ground, you and I are in the clinic, you see the people. And so I envision the future where there's an opportunity for us on the ground to
for you to then connect and us to be able to achieve what we want to together. So more aspirational than pragmatic.
That's great. Thanks, Josh. We really appreciate it. Karen, go ahead. Where do you hope to see your community and your work in 10 years with this PCN process?
I really hope that this primary care task force that involves multiple stakeholders in the community and our local government and our health authority and primary caregivers is able to make this campus of care community health clinic a reality, and that it really is a place that people are happy working, that attaches everybody that wishes to have a full service family doctor and has great access and team-based care, and that just really brings the joy back to work as well.
Greg.
I would agree with everything that has to be said, that was said. I really think that trying to leave the primary care system better than the way we found it. A lot of us won't be here 10 years from now, so leaving it in a better position. That better position would be to have those partnerships be equal partnerships. Where the partnership between the health authorities and between the ministry and the divisions and First Nations is an equal partnership, to include all our stakeholders and to have the community leaders involved in this as well, because this is part of their own. The primary care is their own as well. We can't think of the people without thinking of the community as a whole. And then to set those partnerships up so that they can respond to change and be able to deal with it, and also to cause system change. Not that it's always top down from the ministry decides this is how we're going to do, but to be able to use these partnerships to influence system change and to develop that. And going back to primary care, to have it a place where patients do have family doctors and people start to see value in primary care because they have a primary care provider to take care of them, to be involved in their care. And also to be a place where primary care providers like to work. Nowadays there's a question, a lot of people are not picking a lot of family physicians are not picking primary longitudinal care as a place to work. Why is that? And how can we make this a little bit better? And is the PCN a way, the PCN principle is a way to make primary care a little bit better so that these new providers will pick longitudinal care to spend their careers in, to take a look at all those levels, but really make it better than the way we found it. And I think we can do lots to improve.
Thank you. That's absolutely true. I think we talk a ton about recruitment for rural communities and what that's going to look like. And we don't, I think, focus enough on retention and how once you get somebody to a community, into a place, how do we get them to stay there? And I just see all the visions that you guys have set out for your communities as an exercise in retention and really finding a place that people will come and want to be part of, and won't be able to find a better place to work anywhere else because the team-based care and the communities that they're in will be fulfilling their needs and their professionally, emotionally, and all along that. Someone did put in a question, which I thought was really great. And to end on it, I think is valuable, but in a hopefully a positive way, is how do we use the PCN process and the work that we're doing to kind of combat moral injury as an idea within our practice through this COVID time, but also just through reform, primary care reform, the lack of longitudinal care. Those of us who've chosen this work feeling as though other people aren't choosing it, which then makes us question, why are we doing it in this way? If other people look at it and say, this is a wild thing for you to do, why on earth would you pick this as your option? So just want to comment on what you see within your practices, your communities around that issue of burnout, moral injury, and how PCN might be a solution to that, if it is, or if there's other solutions. I see this conversation as part of that solution for inspiring hope, but maybe So I'll just ask anyone who wants to comment. That's kind of a broad question. Just unmute and go ahead.
Tracy, I think part of the value add for the wellness perspective from our GP's perspective, right, is you get to have a social worker that's now going to work on the disability form for you, which gives you the opportunity to go home a little bit earlier, or you're going to be able to offload some of the mental health counseling to someone else that trusts, that you trust, that your patients can see. And so the hope is the PCN creates a team-based care so you can then offload some of your work and therefore be in a better place yourself, right? I think that's still in evolution. I think that's still because of the increasing demands of family practice, both through COVID and otherwise. And so then I really, really, really believe that the team is actually key, and how you build your team at your clinic. And I don't mean build your team to provide service, but have those hallway conversations, and the constituency of your wellness is a direct formation of who you have around you. A few years ago, the health authority asked questions of all the nursing staff, do you have a best friend at work? Which at the time I thought was a silly question, but now I acknowledge that like lots of us have best friends. The fact that we can then offload, emotionally vomit, or share whatever our struggles are together at our team-based clinic or at our clinics.
Yeah, I agree. And I think at the other level was that the PCN has given us a bit of leverage to get involved a bit more at a system level. It's helped us develop partnerships with our health region, with the Ministry of Health, and with First Nations. And through those partnerships, we have a bit more leverage to have a bit more power over what happens in primary care. We have a voice now, we're a bit more empowered, and we can start to influence at another level, which we've never been able to influence before. So having control of your own environment that you're working in is a big thing. And this is an opportunity to take that and run with it, and to really show the value in what we're doing, and to be able to really make difference as far as what has been happening in primary care.
And just to follow on, I think we kind of self-select as people that are willing to take responsibility way, way beyond the level that we should take responsibility for things. And I think to follow on what Josh and Greg have said, that we really need to recognize that we can share the load. And I see PCN as an opportunity to truly share the load. For example, all those social determinants of health that I've tried to struggle with my whole career, that I've never done a great job with because I don't understand the structure of the system well enough to do that. Don't have the time to spend to also try to do that in a way that it deserves to be dealt with. And because social determinants cover such a vast array of the health of our patients, I need help with that. And so when I know I don't have to do all of that all by myself, and I've got a team of specialists that can help me with that, that makes my life way, way easier. And it also takes away from that sense that I have to be responsible for everything. So that's what I really hope for.
I don't know, Bonnie or Karen, if you want to jump in. Do you have any closing words for everybody?
Oh, I don't have any closing words, but I just would agree with, I would really echo what everyone has said, that moral injury is much easier when you're part of a mass of hundreds doing the same thing and dispersing it. And there are people better than us at doing some of these things. So I think it really, that is the ticket.
And I would say I'm really inspired by hearing what is happening. And one of the things for my closing words is that sometimes we feel like we depend on the ministry for the finances for us, but as a team we can move forward with other resources. People are going to the municipality, going to the community, and I think that is maybe part of what we need to address to move forward. So it's really inspiring to hear that it's happening in different communities.
Well, I am really thrilled with this conversation today, and I hope that all the 83 participants who've been listening and chatting and hearing have also taken some really important practical, but also inspirational thoughts from all of your experiences. This is already a team of leaders who are on this call. As great as Rob just mentioned, we sort of self-select to do this work, and then that puts us sort of in a different position. And then even the folks that show up for this conversation, but the 5 people who joined us for this panel are really such excellent examples of our profession and the work that's happening in our province. And I'm really honored to have participated in this conversation with you today. And I really am super grateful. I'm sure no one will be unhappy if any individual people who are listening on this panel want to try to get in touch with each of our panelists about conversations they had or things that they mentioned. I'm sure they'd be happy to feedback to you any specific practical details around their work. And we do have Rob and Josh are later presenting. And is anyone else presenting this afternoon? Sorry if I don't know that, their own experiences. So that might be a way to follow up with them if there was things here. So thank you all for this conversation, this opportunity, and for opening our PCN forum in this way. I think it's going to, things that have happened in this chat and in this conversation, I think are going to be seeds of really excellent wisdom through the rest of the conversation for the day. And I'm just grateful for you. So thank you, Josh and Rob and Greg and Karen and Bonnie, for your experience and for being willing to share with us today what's been happening. And there's lots of excellent chat things happening in the bottom. So thank you.